A few weeks ago, we saw the front line of the war in Rhodesia. Tonight in Woman Today Special, we take a look at another aspect, the women who for 10 years have known no other life.
Came back at 10:30 and said that they had found him. He had been killed by terrorists, just shot one shot through the heart.
Hung around for about 2 hours drinking, and then they brutally murdered her and took off into the hills.
And he was shot point blank by two black security officers.
I personally can't bear seeing a man cry, but you have to put on a front and cope with that situation.
This is a country which has lived with the ravages of war for so long that a whole generation of young people has grown up knowing no other life.
Where have all the young men gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young men gone?
Salisbury, 1980. To the visitor, day-to-day life, particularly in the cities, presents an outward appearance of tranquility and calm. Yet, beneath the veneer of normality runs a current of violence so savage that there are few families anywhere who have escaped the touch of sorrow, death, or destruction.
Good evening, here is the news. A Combined Operations Headquarters communique reports the deaths in action of 3 members of the security forces. The murder by terrorists is reported of Mr. Walter Barclay Brown, a 56-year-old farmer, his wife Mrs. Hazel Sheila Brown, and 74-year-old Mr. John Edward Gilbert. They died when a gang of terrorists attacked their homestead in the Hartley farming area yesterday evening, November the 12th. Security forces have mounted follow-up operations. All next of kin have been informed. Security forces have killed 41 terrorists and 13 terrorist collaborators. Elsewhere in the operational areas, terrorists have murdered 6 black civilians. On Sunday evening, in the northeastern operational area, a man who had refused the demands of a Zanla terrorist gang for food was bayoneted to death. In the same area, a boy who trod on a terrorist landmine was killed in the explosion. In the same part of the country, an unidentified man was killed when a Scotch guard detonated a terrorist landmine. That is the end of the communique.
But every white family in this country has been affected by the war in the last 7 years, certainly. And it seems to have made a lot of families more closely knit. It's made communities very much more closely knit. And women have, surprisingly in some cases, because it was a fun country, have taken the place of men in any sphere you like to name.
Stand up! In, Hobson! Go on! Shut, Hobson! Look up! That's it. Quite a move. To the right, please. Right! Turn the direction now!
Girls in the Rhodesian army are recruited mainly for a clerical role. Certain of them do come and do various trades depending on what they've done before. I think the intention here is that they will release more men into the field so that they can go out and have a more active role while the women take over the administration.
What motivation do the girls have for joining?
I think essentially it's I want to do something for my country. Obviously you will always find a few who would join the army because there are a couple of males around. But I think deep down inside it's something that they really and truly want to do.
I joined the army because I wanted to help my country. I believe in what they're fighting for, and I'd like to be part of it. And in the army, I can carry out this role. Initially, when you start your training, it is a little bit difficult in the sense that all of a sudden you are being disciplined, perhaps from someone far younger than yourself. You have to accept this, obviously, and it takes a little time to get used to it. But this is life in the army. And after having gone through your recruit course, you come out a very much better person. I'll say that.
I'm South African and I came up to join the Rhodesian army in September 78. I felt I wanted to join the army to know the experience of the army life and also to try and play a part in helping the Rhodesians in the war. The remount training is basically training of individual horses to the way we have to use them on patrols, in the bush, to get them adapted to gunfire, living out there, and going through a pretty rough time altogether. It can take anything up, depending on the stage the horse is at when we get it. It can take from 3 months, 1 month, up to a year, depending entirely on how young the horse is or, as I say, what stage it's at when it gets here. Several of us have come off quite badly. One of the boys has bust both arms twice. I've bust my shoulder blade, dislocated my shoulder twice, gaunched up my knee. And we've all gone through a bad patch one time or other. The women that come in here are mainly riders who have ridden most of their lives, or pretty good riders who have, say, ridden for, say, 5, 6 years. But most of us have ridden most of our lives and know, you know, at least more than the basics about horsemanship.
Well, veterinary assistant means to me I can work with the animals I love most, the horses, and it gives me a great satisfaction to know that I can help patch them up when they've been wounded in an operational area.
One of the major benefits that the war has brought to the Air Force has been the introduction of women in uniform on a regular basis. They're now working alongside men in a whole variety of Air Force jobs. In the parachute packing section, women are doing a very valuable job packing and repairing parachutes used for supply drops and for dropping men into action. In all of the time that we've been using women in this section, there has never been a malfunction of a parachute due to a packer's mistake. When you consider that the girls are packing something like 15,000 parachutes every year, that really is quite an achievement. Equally vital to Air Force operations is the work that women do in the flying clothing section, servicing the flying helmets and masks and so on, which our aircrews use when they go into battle.
The women most actively involved in a paramilitary role in the Rhodesian conflict are the police reservists. Their main aim is the preservation of life and, secondly, that of property. These women man radio stations all over the country, run the armory, issue weapons. They work in the bomb squad, help conduct cordon and search and roadblocks. They also carry out routine station duties and at the same time organize food and supplies for the men in the sticks. What you're seeing now is a cordon and search in operation. At any moment of any day, a major street can be cordoned off and its occupants thoroughly searched. The reservists are looking for weapons and explosives, and the main object of this exercise is to prevent urban terrorism infiltrating the cities.
Roadblocks are boring, very, very tiring. They last for 10 hours, and we have a roadblock round the city every minute of every day. And the woman's part in the roadblock is searching other women. Go right through the katunda, the suitcases, the baggages, if they're carrying melons, or you've got truckloads of guavas, mealies, pumpkins, you have to get them all out, go through the whole lot. Searching babies' nappies, you can understand, isn't everyone's idea of fun. And you know, a lot of the African women carry their babies on their backs still. So in a search, you have to search the mother first, take the baby off, hold it on your chest, thoroughly search baby, and turn the mother round, search her, put the baby back on again. There was one occasion when an alert searcher on a roadblock picked up the fact that an African woman was constantly joggling baby on her back, although it wasn't crying. Now, this baby had been through the searchers. They'd found nothing. So how they called her back into line when they noticed the constant joggling and took the child off. Baby was dead and had been slit from throat to groin and had 5 hand grenades stuck into him.
Right. 5 rounds application in your own time, at your own target. Carry on.
When I joined the police reserve, I had never fired so much as a pellet gun in my life. And because of that, I decided I wasn't going to try and use a weapon because I didn't know how to at all. Anyhow, one of the men said to me one day, all we want you to be able to do is to pick up a gun and go on firing if we're knocked out. Well, after that, I couldn't not learn to fire. So since then, I've come up most Saturday mornings. I've learnt to fire a pistol and an FN. I can also manage an Uzi, and I have also fired an ordinary shotgun, but I find that a little bit heavy because it kicks so. When I tried to join the police reserve, I went up to the Hard Square and presented myself, and was told at the time that there was an age restriction. But finally, I got an appointment to see one of the senior officers. I went in, told him that I knew there was an age restriction. I accepted that in peacetime conditions, but I couldn't see it mattered in a war situation. And all that I wanted was somebody to misread my date of birth. And he gave me a lopsided smile and said, "Can you cook?" And I said, "Yes."
My job in the police reserve is to deploy large quantities of men in operational areas, which means driving anything, kudus, Land Rovers, heavies, crocodiles, pumas, you name it, I might just drive it. There was a particular occasion when I had to deploy lots of men in the operational area. No one was personnel was there. And I deployed them, and I couldn't get to my truck reversed because it was wet and soggy, and I had to reverse 30 k's up the road with no lights at all.
I think women have come extremely well. They had a lot to put up with, to start with their husbands going away to the bush. But since then, they've acclimatized themselves and they've joined in the war in their own ways. A lot of them go out to the canteens, and those that are at home with their children, they bake a lot for the troops. Those that older people, they do a lot of knitting for the troops. They help in many, many, many different ways. They work in the radio rooms, they work in the police reserve, air wing reserves. Many, many different ways which they've never thought of doing before.
Yet another aspect of the Rhodesian conflict is the growth of services dealing with direct effects of terrorism. Kaye Smit is an insurance assessor who travels around the country evaluating war damage to farms, homesteads and stores.
I generally fly to the assessments because I find it's quicker and I can get more work done, which benefits both me and, of course, the people who've sustained a loss. Flying, of course, is hazardous in this country at the moment, and generally one has to take special precautions. I, for example, tend to fly low over certain areas to avoid being shot at, and, of course, I am always armed in the event that if I am shot at, I'm at least able to defend myself, look after myself. But when it comes to flying to a particularly dangerous area, I approach the police beforehand and ask if they could possibly arrange an escort for me, and also have the field cleared, because there have been landmines on the strips in the past. They provide an armed escort, they take you over dirt roads to wherever you want to go, and I don't know that I'd be able to do my job at all without their assistance. My work is very varied, because terrorists don't stop at anything, and generally the work involves looking over burnt-out buildings, kraals, burnt-out vehicles, crop losses, and of course livestock thefts.
Physical damage to farms and homes is one aspect of the war's devastation. Of deeper significance to many are the divisive emotional effects of war and the often permanent damage to human relationships. Brutality, atrocities and loss breed an inevitable scarring of the psyche.
My boyfriend's been with his company since the end of '75. He worked for 6 months. He then volunteered to do his national service, which was then 18 months. After he finished his national service, he had to do his normal call-ups, which was 42 days in the bush, 3 weeks out. He's been doing that ever since. So in actual fact, he's been with his firm 3.5 years, but he's only actually worked a year.
I think the relationships between young men and women become more difficult in a war situation. One often hears girls complain that their men have been away fighting with their mates in the bush, when they come home on leave, all they want to do is to drink with their mates for the first couple of days. I think it's important to explain to girls during counselling that this is a perfectly normal winding down phase, that a chap who's been in the bush and under constant threat of death for some weeks reaches a very high pitch of awareness and alertness, and he does need a day or two to sort of wind down to a normal civilian level, and often they find a group effect and drinking is helpful in this particular state. It's not that they don't care for the girl, it's just that they do need this period to unwind to a normal level again.
He's very edgy and very nervous. It takes about a week and a half for him to settle down. He's not even used to sleeping in a bed. And any loud bang, he starts shaking. But he eventually calms down. When he calms down, he's off to the bush again.
Another thing I think a girl has to try to understand is that, again, faced with a threat of death, recurrently, young men begin to adopt rather different attitudes, and they feel that they must do as much living as they can, as quickly as they can. And for this reason, they often press their girlfriends into a premature sexual relationship. And the cherishing and caring aspects of the relationship tend to become undervalued. They're not so considerate of the girl's feelings. They feel, as if you like, that they are owed a good time while they can. For the same reason, because of the recurrent uncertainty of our situation, young men seem to be reluctant to commit themselves to a permanent relationship. They seem afraid to become that deeply emotionally involved. And one finds, I think, larger numbers of temporary relationships, living together or living together in all but name, seem to be more common, I think, for this reason.
I think a lot of the girls and the guys have changed. The girls tend to go out by themselves more. They go in a big crowd. They try and meet guys, and they seem to tend to stick together by themselves. As soon as they come back from the bush, they go and get drunk. They stay with their mates, and the girls have got to try and meet them.
I think maybe the girls, too, feel that they're not particularly anxious to commit themselves to a soldier who may not come back and start raising a family. I think there's, again, a reluctance on the part of the girls as well, but more so on the part of the men, I think.
Well, all the children in this day centre have been born since the war. They're anything from 4 years of age up to 5 years. We find the mothers are young. They were even schoolgirls and schoolboys when war broke out here. When we opened this centre 9 years ago, we had very few applications from single girls. Today we'll get 2, 3, sometimes even 4 in 1 week. Mothers tend to be very young, and the tendency seems to be that they want to keep their children, often quite unrealistically. The effects of war on the children themselves, it's a little difficult to assess because these children have grown up with war. To them, it's a way of life. They're used to seeing fathers, uncles, boyfriends in khaki and coming and going. I think they'd be a little surprised to have a father who was at home all the time. But it has affected, for instance, the sort of games they play. Now, our nursery school teacher will say that the children in woodwork, for example, can make very realistic FNs because most of them have seen plenty. They'll also make aeroplanes. Their minds are really attuned to war. When they play games, they don't play cops and robbers as other children used to do. They play soldiers and terrors. And will run around pursuing each other, making noises of machine guns.
Carry on. What else are you going to say about the dragonfly?
Going to say that when I've turned into...
Well, Craig is 9, and his teacher was telling me that his handwriting has deteriorated badly. His schoolwork is getting very bad, and that he was lazy, and she wanted to know if it was a medical problem. So I took him to my doctor because I thought he might have a coordination problem. And my doctor tested him. We were there for about an hour. He tested him for every conceivable thing. Coordination, eyesight, everything. And there's nothing physically wrong with Craig. Then we asked him what could be the problem, and if it was with my husband going into the bush. And he said this was quite possible, that it's manifesting itself in that Craig has lost interest in his schoolwork, and he can't be bothered anymore. And I found that when my husband goes into the bush, Craig will wet his bed 2, 3 times in the 3 weeks he's away, When he's back, I have no problems with bedwetting.
Older children have special troubles, I think, because they know the situation that their parents can be, for instance, on the farms. I'm thinking particularly of the children who are in boarding schools in town, but who have been on farms that have been attacked and can realize only too well what may be happening with their parents. These children suffer what I think you might call waking dreams. They're distinct from nightmares, which are fantasy. Their dreams could be real. And these children, I think, are under most terrible strain.
I believe, or rather I'm strongly convinced that the two people who have borne the brunt of this war, most of the brunt of the war, are the rural African women and children. They've been victims of many negative things from both sides of the war. I'll start with the children, for instance. I believe they will grow up with a big sense of fear and hatred. Fear of some of the horrible things they have seen performed in their own eyes. And this may include the death of a parent in the most atrocious way, or the constant fear and startlement of guns and bombs going off. Most of the villages are composed of women, and again, they suffer the negative effects from both sides. They do all the hard work of cooking for the boys and running errands, and they have to face the harassment of the security forces. Why did you cook for them? What do you do when somebody is pointing a gun at you? You don't cook for them.
It hasn't affected me that much at all. The only way it has affected me is that, in the sense that I cannot go out to the tribal trust land to see my grandmother, and I can't move freely because of the curfew areas. Well, I hope they can get rid of them so anybody can move around whatever time of the day.
My personal experience came with the death of my father-in-law. There was a group of boys operating within his home area, and on this particular day, they were at his homestead when the spotter aeroplane appeared. And all villagers now, when you see the spotter aeroplane, trouble is ensuing. They run away or do what the best they can. My mother-in-law tried to persuade the boys to leave, her place, but they wouldn't move. So she left to go and fetch some water. My father-in-law had been herding cattle and had just brought them to the cattle kraal. He had just finished locking them up, as it were, when he turned to go home, and he was shot point blank by two black security officers. When a third one asked them why they had done this, one of them just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, I had been grabbed by the spirit of killing.
Not all tribesmen, however, live under this intense pressure. Some live in protected villages built by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They're fenced in, security guarded, and provided with vital amenities such as schools, clinics, and business centres. The district commissioners oversee these protected villages, and these men and their wives live in singular isolation.
Out here we have to take special precautions such as the security wall here to protect our homestead. We have grenade screens up at the window and sandbags up at the walls. We have a bunker at the back of the house, also for rocket attacks, but we're perfectly safe whilst we're in the house and inside the security fence. We do have a problem though when my husband goes out into the bush. He is liable to be attacked, or it is very dangerous for him, and that's very, very worrying for us. We have two children, one at boarding school and one here. We have the problem of travelling over the road into Salisbury to collect her, which is frequently landmined, and there are also ambushes on the road now and again. But once we're back here, then everything's all right. We're perfectly safe.
The other wives, of course, who live in isolation are the farmers' wives.
This is a typical mine-protected vehicle, and this is the entrance to a typical Rhodesian farm.
But don't be deceived by the apparent placidity of the scene. The farmers who enter this particular farm road are constantly under great hazardous threats from the terrorists, either from landmines, ambushes, or attacks on their very homesteads. And most of the farmers who travel on these particular roads travel in either mine-protected or mine-proofed vehicles in their own protection.
The first thing that I knew about an attack was it was in the evening, about 8:15, and I'd gone out to the kitchen, fetch something that they wanted for the morning, and first thing I knew, a ball of fire, which we eventually discovered was this piece of rocket coming past me, an almighty explosion with it. My first reaction was to fall to the floor.
The first thing I knew was the copy looked like a line of fairy lights, if you can visualize that, and then suddenly I heard the noise and I realized that we were being attacked because I was out in the garden and just seen the girls off, and then I just simply started firing back, and it was carried on from there.
By this time the kitchen was an absolute inferno. You couldn't go anywhere near it. And I was my husband, what do we do about the fire? He said, well, we can't think about that. I feel that we as farmers, this is our personal view, that we can live under these conditions, one has to admit, the chance of attack any night, just for so long, hoping that things will stabilize.
Umtali, Zimbabwe Rhodesia's frontline city bordering Mozambique, and it's a mere stone's throw from enemy territory, harbouring those terrorists whose avowed intention is to destroy the very fabric of society. It's from here that terrorists have been bombarding the city. Every man, woman and child, more than anywhere else in a concentrated area of the country, have experienced the direct effects from the war. In fact, from these very hillsides, on many occasions, the terrorists have been bombarding the city of Umtali. And a mere stone's throw from where we're now standing, only this week a woman was brutally murdered.
Yes, the people and women and children of Umtali have really suffered here. But at the beginning of the year, we had a very vicious murder at the Elam Mission, which is only about 15 miles from Umtali. Women and children were slaughtered. And just beginning of this week, Monday, two elderly couple who live just outside Umtali. He came into town, which is a normal thing, on the Monday morning at about 6 o'clock. And the area had been surveyed by 14 terrorists. And as soon as he'd left, they moved in and they caught her down at the paddocks near her horses. They took her up to her house. They pillaged the house. They took what they wanted from the house, hung around for about 2 hours drinking, and then they brutally murdered her and took off into the hills.
We didn't know until the following day that this man's own son had been killed in a landmine explosion only a few months before. This is the customary security procedure in all Umtali hotels, shops, public places. A thorough search is conducted of anything you're carrying. Even your cigarette packet is opened up. It's carried out by trained security personnel who know precisely what they're looking for. When they've completed their search of your belongings, there is after that a thorough body search. In fact, it doesn't matter how many times you come in and out of a building or a hotel, exactly the same search is still conducted in, of course, the general interest of security. And normally the women are searched in a curtained cubicle. This poster spells reality to the people of Umtali. On several occasions, they've experienced major bomb blasts in their shops. This one was the work of 5 black women who entered a large store with explosives strapped to their thighs. Because of a timing error, 3 of them blew themselves up. The people involved were hardly women. They were mere girls between the ages of 15 and 16. In the event of a major disaster such as a bomb blast, Rhodesian hospitals have special emergency procedures. They can immediately summon extra doctors, nurses and equipment. While troops seriously wounded in contacts in the operational area are generally transported directly to the Andrew Fleming Hospital in Salisbury by helicopter.
Well, when I hear the sound of a helicopter, my
stomach just turns, because the first thing you think about is who it is, whether you know them or not, and how bad the injuries are. It's terrible. It's an awful feeling.
When soldiers are brought into this hospital, as far as the nursing staff is concerned, they are patients, in that we take an oath to nurse anyone, regardless of race, color, or creed. So when soldiers come in, they're just like any of our patients, with the exception that you sort of feel what an unwarranted waste of human life and suffering.
I think as a nurse, a lot of reassurance, sometimes a shoulder to lean on. A lot of these guys get depressed during their stay here, and one has to sit and listen, stay with them, and I know seeing them cry is terrible. I personally can't bear seeing a man cry, but you have to put on a front and cope with that situation.
Generally, most of them adapt to their injuries very well, but you get some of them, especially who've lost limbs and who are sports orientated, and they find it very hard to adjust. So you've got to help them along. Sometimes a long, hard battle, both for you and the patient, but you've just got to keep their morale up, keep them going.
For 20 years, St Giles Medical Rehabilitation Centre has been looking after physically handicapped people. However, the terrorist war has added a new dimension to its duties. War casualties needing rehabilitation are sent here to learn to cope with their disabilities and also to face once again a normal life. St Giles is staffed almost entirely by women.
There are really 3 specific kinds of injuries which we treat at St Giles as a result of war injury. These are particularly the spinal injuries, patients involved in gunshot wounds, landmine explosions. Then we have the head injury patients, and then we also have the patients who have lost limbs, usually as a result of landmine explosions during terrorist activity. These 3 particular kinds of injuries involve long-term rehabilitation programs. Many of the patients are housed in our own ward block and involve a multidisciplinary team of therapists to give them a very full rehabilitation program. The spinal cases in particular require rehabilitation to help them to adapt to possibly a wheelchair existence and coping with life, living in a wheelchair as opposed to being independent in walking and so on. The amputation patients come to us, first of all, to get them in a situation to have a prosthesis or artificial limb fitted, and then having had the limb fitted, our therapists help them to learn to use it. So they have to adapt to using an artificial limb instead of their own limbs.
The actual trauma that he is facing in terms of his situation is not all that much different if he'd been injured in a car, for instance, because what he is facing, for instance, someone who's been rendered paralyzed, is the fact that he can't walk anymore, whether he had a bullet through his spine or whether he dived and broke his neck. He is facing the fact that he could walk before and now he can't walk anymore. He can maybe, in his soul searching or trying to go over the incident, trying to work it out of his system, maybe in terms of the war injured, he can say to himself, well, I did it for a good cause. Whereas somebody who just maybe had a car accident can only say, well, I was careless, I was drunk, I had this accident. Self-recriminations maybe are greater in someone who's been injured in a car accident through his own stupidity. But then you do have the cases of people and young men that I've spoken to who've maybe been shot in the spine, and they've said to me, look, if it was through my own stupidity, I would handle it better than the fact that somebody else did it. So there is also the question of futility. So although he hasn't got the self-recriminations, he's got the aspects of, well, it was futile anyway. But overall, he's there, the injury has happened, and he's got to face life with a new self-image.
Tara, I'd like you to copy this word. All right?
Okay.
When a person has had a head injury and he's beginning to recover, and as soon as he starts to become aware of what has happened to him, what his new situation is, he possibly no longer has the same intellectual capabilities that he had before his injury. He's got to adjust to that. He maybe can't read as he read before. He'll be aware of the difference. He can't remember things like he did before. He'll also be aware of that.
We haven't only got a handicapped person, we've got a handicapped family, because that person is going to go back into the family, and his disabilities are going to affect that whole family. My job as a medical social worker is to try and help that family, that socially, emotionally, and financially, if necessary, how to reintegrate that person back into the family and what sort of adjustments they're going to have to make.
We were living in Wankie. My husband was in the police. He was a police inspector. And he was shot in a terrorist contact on the 13th of August 1967. And we weren't aware of any activity at that time. You know, it was very low-key terrorist activity. Nobody really worried very much about it. And so when they came to tell me he'd been shot, you know, I had a lot of difficulty taking it in. I refused to accept for the first 18 months or so that he was going to be permanently disabled with brain damage. You know, I did accept perhaps he might have some physical disability. But I just didn't think that mentally he would never recover. And this, in one aspect, you've still got the person you loved, but you haven't got them in the sense that you knew them before. You haven't got this terrible grief which you would have with somebody dying. But you are virtually on your own, and it's almost as good as being, you know, virtually a widow.
This is a group of carefree, happy schoolgirls. Several months later, one of them, 16-year-old Shirley Wicksteed, lost both her legs.
Went out to stay with some friends for an exit weekend in Topanga, and went to stay on the farm, came back, and on the way back we hit a landmine, and I had a premonition about it, and I told a couple of my friends.
That this was going to happen to you?
Yes, I did. Well, I didn't know what injuries, but I told them, you know, I wouldn't be back at school on the Monday. And I turned around and there was the back of a cab being blown off the truck, and the father was dead, well, the stepfather was there, and the wife was dead. And the army came and asked how everyone else was, and they said fine, but I found out later that the two youngest kids had died, and a friend of mine died 2 weeks later.
Trevor has been tremendously disabled, and the whole family has been in on this. We have just had to make the best of it. This has happened. It's no good looking back. This is what's happened to Trevor. We've just got to get down to it and make the very best we can of it. He was a young man when this happened, and you know, a mother, like her child, evolves. You form different relationships as the child gets older. Your whole relationship changes, and suddenly he's given back to you, having gone to the army, completely dependent in so many ways, like a baby again, and yet his mind is that of a man's. So there is a very, very fine dividing line, and this is the most difficult part of it all. One wants to do everything one can for this child of yours. He's been thrust into this, well, we've all been thrust into it, and you want to make life so much easier for him. You want to do everything you possibly can. In fact, you want to mother him. And this is the very worst thing you can do. But this you find out the hard way. You have got to respect his manhood. You've got to respect his mind. He must make decisions for himself. One is inclined to want to even make his decisions for him. In fact, in the very early days, I found I was answering for him. Somebody came along and asked him a question. I was inclined to answer for him. And of course this did him no good, it did none of us any good. And gradually one adjusts, one realizes it's hard, it's the hardest possible thing for a mother to stand back while you know he's finding things so very difficult. But you've got to. You have to learn to accept there are times, fortunately, I haven't had many of them, of a little bit of bitterness, not for how our lives have changed, but for how Trevor's life has changed. He had his whole life before him, and he had a bright future. And now I've come to the stage where I realize he has a bright future, although it's not going to be on the physical side. I'm convinced that it's going to be from his mind and from his personality will come great things.
And what about those who have no future? The 30,000 who will never return.
Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
Well, he died on the 2nd of November 1979, virtually a year to the day that my brother died. He had gone out onto a farm to work as a manager there. And I went out on the Friday that he was killed. I went out to the farm to spend the weekend with him. And got there just after lunch, and he wasn't anywhere around, and we just thought he was out on the land. And by 6:30, the farmer took a party of his militia and went out on the land in the Land Rover to see if they could find him. And they came back and they hadn't done. They then called out the army and came back at 10:30 and said that they had found him. He had been killed by terrorists, just shot through the heart.
He was killed in the last Mozambique raid in September, after he'd been in the army for about 6 years.
What happened?
After the raid, they were in a helicopter, and the helicopter was shot down. I'm not sure exactly why, but there was 12 of them in that chopper, and a great tragedy for the whole of Rhodesia. I think everyone was affected, especially the army, because it was such an involving incident.
When that happened, were you working here?
Yes, I was, fortunately. Somehow St Giles, I'm one of the privileged Rhodesians that are able to work here. I find that, you can't indulge in self-pity at all, because you look at these marvellous people around you who have been wounded by the war, and they never allow themselves to get in depressions or, I found that through that whole period they kept my spirits high. And you suddenly realise, you're very fortunate that you're alive, and that probably that my fiancé wasn't like that. So, I look at these blokes and I think, what fantastic people. They just, somehow they manage to keep above everything. They become sensitive, humble, full of fun, deep. And I'm just really lucky to be working with them.
My husband was in the RLI, and we just got married in February, and he was killed in April, and I was pregnant. And my brother watched the accident, and through that, the army sent him to South Africa on holiday, and he's never been able to go into the bush anymore. And he's now in Selous. He is a sergeant. He's never been able to go into the bush. And the time when my husband was killed, I was pregnant, and through that, I carried my little girl for nearly 10 months through shock. And I had opportunities to get married again, but I'm terrified to do it, to get married again, because of what happened in the first marriage.
My husband was killed in the first Viscount disaster in September last year, and because he had his own business, I was put in the hot seat straight away. I was having to try and get it back on its feet and cope with the children at the same time.
How have you adjusted emotionally? Have you been left with a sense of bitterness or futility?
Yes, I think one does feel bitter at first, and I don't know that it obviously lessens, but I don't know that one actually loses it when somebody loses a loved one in the way I did.
Nobody who holds sacred the dignity of human life can be anything but sickened at the events attending the crash of the Viscount Hunyani. This bestiality, worse than anything in recent history, stinks in the nostrils of heaven.
Rhodesian women have endured the vicious reality of war for 11 years. The country has now reached a turning point in its history, and its future is still unknown. How do women view this future, and what are their hopes?
Peace. Peace and sanity, because I'm quite sure that we will all look forward to leading normal lives again. Normal lives where you know where your children are, you know what's going to happen. They're not constantly being called up or away. I think everyone's hope for the future is peace. And if there is peace, and if there is constant law and order here, and a general sanity governing the country, this will be wonderful for Rhodesian women and for men.
What the future holds, no one knows. But we are worried. We are worried about patients, war injuries, war casualties, who are permanently disabled and who will have to be cared for, especially lads whose parents will die eventually and will have to be cared for by who? We don't know. But some form of charity, some form of institution must be built, must be erected, must be staffed, in which these people can live.
We foresee a good future here, provided we're left alone by Marxist Russia and her satellites. We, the Zimbabwe Rhodesians who want peace, who are 90%, won't find any of the coming changes intolerable. If we move to other lands, we have to accustom ourselves to change. We've fought long and hard here, all of us, lost so many lives, and we're going to stay.
My feelings about the future of Zimbabwe are that I feel that the future is very promising, particularly for the young people. I think it will be full of challenge for them. They'll have to cope not only with the everyday work, they'll also have to try and solve some of the problems which have been created by the war.
Well, it's just everybody in Rhodesia just has to go on for their children's sake. And that's all there is to it. You just have to grin and bear it. It's just one of those things.
I wish I could sort of see into it. I honestly don't know. I just know that I've got 3 children still to educate, and hopefully I can see that all out through in Rhodesia.
When I look at things, I'm of the impression that the situation is going to improve, and I'm looking to a very bright future.
Well, we're going to sit it out and see what happens and hope for the best. Everything we've got is invested in this country.
Oh, I can see a lot of promise for the future. I think the people that are in Zimbabwe Rhodesia are going to make sure that everything goes very, very well here. And it is going to go well because the people are going to make it go well.
I think if we're all going to stay here and live and work here, it will be very much a case of black and white working together. Hopefully, that's how we hope it's going to be.
Everybody, I think, has had enough of sort of the fighting and the shedding of blood everywhere. So we're all hoping for peace in the near future.
If standards drop here, I don't mean tennis pools and swimming parties. I mean schools, the future, careers, openings for their children. If those are not safeguarded, the women will go. They will not put up with a second-class life for their families.
I'd stay here until it proved that you just couldn't stay anymore. Hopefully that won't come to that.
I came to Rhodesia almost 12 years ago as a widow with 5 young children to support. Rhodesia's helped me to support and educate those children, and I'm staying here until I'm driven out.
I feel that we've taken a lot from this land, and now we must give back. We must have courage and not run because of adversity. And we are looking forward to the future to help build. And I think we've taken, and I said before, now we must give. And for us, for my family, there is no other life